As we look at the actual text here in some detail, not incredible detail, but when we begin to read through it, we see that Aristotle opens this inquiry into ethics by characterizing human action in general. What we do, we're human beings. We do things. And you might say, well, all living creatures do things, and sure they do. But human action is, if not unique, then characterized by the fact that the things that we do have some aim, purpose, in our translation, an end. And the word end obviously has its primary meaning as being the last thing. You know, the movie comes to an end when the movie stops. The week comes to an end when, well, no one's really sure. It's either on Saturday or Monday, or when it starts. But you know what I mean. But end here is used. I don't know what the exact translation is from the Greeks, but the Greeks have this word telos. We would spell it Telos, and the end here is in terms of telos, the purpose, the goal, the reason for, the why, you might say. So he begins by saying every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit, is thought to aim at some good. Some good, some end, some purpose, some goal. And for this reason, the good has rightly been declared to be that at which all things aim. But a certain difference is found among ends, right? Ends, what's the end here? What is the reason? What is that what you're aiming for? Some are activities, others are products apart from the activities that produce them, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, sometimes, you know, it's a why do you do something? If you get up off the couch and you walk to the store and you buy a loaf of bread, then that loaf of bread is the end. It's the having of eating of that loaf of bread. That was the purpose of your action. It was a purposive action, an action having a purpose. I mean, some things we do, he says, you know, for the sake of other things. In fact, most of what we do is for the sake of other things. I didn't go to the store for the sake of going to the store. I went to the store because I wanted bread. And if I didn't think there was bread at the store, I wouldn't go, right? Of course, some of the things that we do is just for the doing of them. And that's an important distinction, where he says, where there are ends apart from the actions, and that would be the loaf of bread, which is the end apart from the action of actually going to the store. It is the nature of the products to be better than the activities. And, you know, sometimes there are no ends, though, right? Playing a game. Some things we do just for the sake of doing them and not for the sake of something we get out of them that's separate from them. But everything that we do, which could be called a real action, as opposed to something that happens to us, is directed towards some end. That's what he establishes in the first section. But in the second section, as you get the second step here, he says, if then there is some end of the things we do. And again, end is purpose, goal, aim, not final limitation. If then there is some end of the things we do, which we desire for its own sake, everything else being desired for the sake of this, and if we do not choose everything for the sake of something else, for at that rate the process would go on to infinity so that our desire would be empty and vain, clearly this must be the good and the chief good. The chief good, the greatest good, the summum bonum in Latin. Right? The idea is that, you know, in a human life, we engage every day in a multitude of activities, and those activities, most of them, are directed towards goods. getting up, going to work, walking across the street to get a cup of coffee, tying your shoes, fixing the toaster. All of these are activities that we engage in for the sake of some good or some end. But those ends or goods are, at best, they are partial ends. They are the things that we have to do to get through the day, or the things that we want at the moment. And for any action, they explain the action. I mean, if somebody sees you tying your shoes, you can explain, well, why are you doing that? Well, because the shoes work better if they're tied, if the laces are tied, and if they're not, and that's the good that you're pursuing in that one moment of your life when you're tying your shoes. Why are you reading that book? Well, that becomes a little more complicated. But say that you're reading it because you're studying for a test. Then it explains your action. You're pursuing the good of doing well in a test. Of course, you don't just read books when you're studying for school. Okay, that's like a rule. But in any case, you see what I mean. So, but what Aristotle's asking, though, in that first part of section 2, is over and above all those partial goods that we pursue every day, is there a chief good, a greatest good? In any one particular action that I may be engaged in at some time, I can usually say what the good is that particular action is in pursuit of. But what about my whole life? That is, if I consider my life to be a collection of a series of activities, if I consider all those activities as a whole, is there an overall good, a chief good, a greatest good, a summum bonum? That is the good of my life, rather than just the good of any particular action that I'm engaging in my life. That's the big question. Is there a greatest good? Is there, apart from these particular activities, is there a greatest goal, a greatest thing that I want to accomplish with my life as a whole, or that my whole life is directed towards, rather than any particular action? And that becomes the big question. If there is such a good, and maybe there's not, but Aristotle thinks that there is, and that's something that makes him differ from a lot of other philosophers. What is this greatest good? As he says, will not the knowledge of it have a great influence on life? Shall we not, like archers who have a mark to aim at, be more likely to hit upon what is right? If so, we must try, in outline at least, to determine what it is. What is the greatest good? Again, if there is one, he does think there is. And after some interesting discussion here about the limits of precision when we're talking about ethics, in section 4, he says what he thinks that it is. He says, let us resume our inquiry and state, in view of the fact that all knowledge and every pursuit aims at some good, what it is that we say political science aims at. Now, political science is, it's political science, and he discusses it here in section 2. Political science would be the science of obtaining the good for the whole city, for the whole political community. The Greeks will, instead of Greeks talking about countries or nations, they'll talk about cities, because it's in particular cities that their political structure is based. The so-called city-state, the polis of ancient Greece. But and what is the highest of all goods achievable by action? Like, what is the highest good achievable by an individual? And presumably, political science would aim at trying to facilitate its individual citizens to be able to reach that highest good. He says, verbally, there is very general agreement for both the general run of men and people of superior refinement say that it is happiness. Okay. Right. Okay. Happiness is the greatest good. Happiness is the summum bonum. Happiness, to connect it up with our leading questions for the course, is what I can hope for. Earthly happiness is my greatest hope, that I will be happy. And presumably, when we think about all those individual actions in pursuit of individual goods that I engage in every day, if we think about what the overall good that they all are meant to contribute towards, it is my happiness. So verbally, there is very general agreement. Verbally, like we all would say, "Oh yes, we all want to be happy." For both the general run of men and people of superior refinement, say that it is happiness. Basically, he's saying both the educated person and the uneducated person would agree that happiness is the overall good, and identify living well and doing well with being happy. Okay, right. But instantly, there are problems, right? But with regard to what happiness is, they differ. Right? That is, we all verbally will agree that we all, at the end of the day, are pursuing happiness. But we disagree about what it is. I mean, what is it that constitutes happiness? But with regard to what happiness is, they differ, and the many, hoi polloi, do not give the same account as the wise. Okay. Now, of course, he's begging the question there. But he says, for the former, the many, think it is some plain and obvious thing like pleasure, wealth, or honor. They differ, however, from one another, and often even the same man identifies it with different things. With health when he is ill, with wealth when he is poor. But conscious of their ignorance, they admire those who proclaim some great ideal that is above their comprehension. Now, some thought that apart from these many goods, there is another which is self-subsistent and causes the goodness of all these as well. That's Plato that he's really referring to examine all the opinions that have been held were perhaps somewhat fruitless, enough to examine those that are the most prevalent or that seem to be arguable. So here we are. I mean, the greatest good is happiness. It provides a holistic overall goal for an individual life. And so, as he says, it would seem that if this is what we are aiming for, that we should try to familiarize ourselves with the target. What is the greatest good? Happiness. What is happiness? What is happiness consist in? And of course, one of our big questions will be, I think anybody reading the book, is who's to say what happiness is? Isn't happiness an entirely subjective phenomenon, perhaps by definition? So that the the project of trying to determine what true happiness is wrongheaded, because there is no such thing. Many would say. Everybody has their own notion of what happiness is because different things make different people happy. How could Aristotle possibly deny that? It's obviously true, right? Well, yes, it is true, but there's some twists, right? And we'll get into that in the next video.